Good evening and welcome to this, the June 19th edition of Beyond the Headlines. It is an absolute pleasure being your host. My name is Colin, Dowe, and from wherever you're joining us, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, whether it is tuned in on GBN Television, GBN Radio, or any of our social media platforms, welcome to Beyond the Headlines. In the forefront in recent times have been lots of conversation about the CPA examinations, and we are extremely pleased to have with us our Minister of Education, Senator Andrews, as well as the Permanent Secretary within the Ministry of Education and Human Resource Development, Sir Elvis Morain, representing the Principals Association, Mrs. Samantha Antoine Purcell, and online, Dr. Anthony Bridgeman. To all of you, welcome to this edition of Beyond the Headlines.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Minister, I believe this is the first time you're sitting with us on Beyond the Headlines, so I would like to welcome you officially to the program since taking up the portfolio.
Thank you.
And whereas we probably would have started off with a celebratory tone, apparently it's the lots of conversations that have stirred you're joining us, the CPA. And just share some background on the Caribbean Primary Exit Assessment, just how long it has been implemented and some of the changes, policy changes that took place in 2023.
Right. Thank you very much, Colin, and thank you for having me, and good night to all of our listeners and viewers and followers on whatever platform you are tonight. I'm happy to be here tonight just to talk a little bit about the Caribbean Primary Exit Assessment, and that is a form of assessment that came into effect quite a number of years ago. I think it was somewhere around 2012, yeah, if I'm not mistaken. And it was an examination that is put together by the Caribbean Examination Council. It has several components. There's a localized component that involves several different forms of assessment, student-led assessment, peer group activities, and then there's a regional component that is tested by the Caribbean Examination Council. This year, traditionally, I mean, the exams have come and gone and the scores have been released. This year, what's been new about it is, for one, we've taken a policy decision not to release from the Ministry of Education to the public the students' scores and ranking. And that we chose to do primarily because, one, it was in contravention to the Education Act. So I want to make it clear to all persons listening that our decision to cease from publishing students' scores and rank is supported by the Education Act. The Education Act makes it clear that students' scores ought not to be made public, or should only be used rather by the institution and the parents, the child's parents, for the purposes of assessment and those kinds of stuff, and should not be done in a way that allows even as the school to be identified. And it must be done with the express and written permission of the parent or the student, if the student is over 18. So, yes.
May I probably challenge you a little bit on this, because what we seem to be saying is from time immemorial, ministries of education, the same one under different leadership, have been in contravention of the Education Act. And then from what you're explaining, it seems to be addressing the privacy and privacy concerns as well as the safeguarding of student records.
Correct.
And the Education Act, of course, will speak to the fact that student records ought not to be released to anyone unless it be to student. Certainly they can ask for it above age 18, the parent or sponsor.
Yeah.
If I'm to challenge you, I would say, as a taxpayer, I am sponsoring the student, and therefore I have a right to the grades and to witness the product of my investment in the education system, because education in public schools are free. How would you respond?
I think if you do that, you're opening a can of worms that you can't close, because you'll be saying the same thing for several other, for the doctors you pay. What happens to patient confidentiality?
Patient confidentiality and scores are something different.
Right?
So,
but you're talking confidentiality of student scores. And I'm saying the same thing can, if we stretch, the confidentiality of patient records or some other hospital services, we can say we want them to because we are payers. But I think I'm clear that the Act speaks very decisively that it ought not to be used other than the ways we've just described. And I think we've been doing that. We've come to grow accustomed with it. But I think apart from operating in contravention to the Education Act, I think it's also been the genesis of a lot of controversy. Students have been subject to lots of comparison, negatively so. People comparing scores, people who never were interested in how the child was doing all along, all of a sudden became interested in how much you got, what was your score, what's my child's score, and in the process, quite a lot of emotional hurt and damage is done to a lot of children. And so we're concerned about that too. In addition to that, I think the system of publicizing scores has created a tendency for persons within the education system to teach to the test, something we discourage in education. We want them to teach the children. We want them to teach our nation's students, not to teach to get high performances on a test. Because the ministry itself has over the years validated those scores. Because we rank those schools, we got X percentage there, X percentage passes, X number of students from this school pass in the first this and the first that. And so those things have caused our school teachers and principals to want to be validated likewise.
But Minister, is it in the test assessing competency? And therefore, if a school is able to attain 100% passes, for example, saying that they're able to bring the students to the competency level that is required for promotion, isn't that a good thing?
We can say that theoretically. Our realities have shown us otherwise, because we have scores of children. In fact, ask the workforce, and they'll tell you we have a lot of persons with X amount of ones in several subject areas who are less work ready, who are less proactive.
Is that a function of the test and not of the school system? Because we have adopted CPA. We had our homegrown common entrance, which actually tested students on things Grenadian. We have moved to a CXC, that is a regional examination, that does not emphasize Grenadianism. So we teach to the test because that is the barometer by which one is promoted into secondary schools. If that test is not satisfying us as a nation, because we have people coming through the CPA that are not able to perform in secondary schools, and students coming out of secondary schools that are not able to easily transition into the workforce, it may mean that we're assessing the wrong things. It may mean that our curriculum is faulty, and hence the education system is not serving Grenada well. How would you comment to that?
Well, I think it could be a combination of several of those factors. I certainly don't think there's a problem with the test per se. I know there's a component on the CPEA that focuses history, it focuses social studies, which is country specific. So I think there's an element of that. I don't think necessarily there's a problem with the test, given the modalities that are used and the fact that you have a local component that allows for student engagement, projects, and those kinds of methodologies for assessment. So I think that's all good. But I do acknowledge the system, the curriculum needs a lot of work. and we are quite aware. The education system needs a lot of work. We are aware. So I'm acknowledging that there are several of those shortfalls, but I don't think our handling of the test and the scores contributed in a positive way to the outcomes.
Mrs. Purcell, negative connotations, first, second, third, I get the highest. Your comments as a recipient of those promoted into the secondary system from primary schools. Of course, you're sitting here as the representative of our Secondary School Principals Association.
I almost wondered if the argument that we put in forward is not quite the same. One of the things you said prior, or one of the questions you raised prior, had to do with, is a test testing what we wanted to test? But the other part, which is where we started, had to do with, is the publishing of the score, the test results, negatively impacting, which are two different things. So I'm going to answer the question in two different parts. First and foremost, I agree with you, Minister. The assessment in large part can be effective. Moving from common entrance to CPA can be effective. I would liken it to what we do at the CSEC level with the introduction of SBAs over the years and the ability for students to be able to engage in project-based learning and a lot of cooperative learning strategies long before they get into the exam room on the day. So I do agree that the test itself, in large part, not completely, but in large part, is probably pretty authentic and likely is valid and reliable. The publishing of the test scores, which is the other part of the question you started off with, interestingly, ironically for me, is neither here nor there. And I will take this opportunity to say, when Minister met with the principals prior to the announcement of the direction that's going to be taken, there was large agreement on the removal of publishing of test scores. So there was a bit of consensus there on that particular point, for sure. Simply because for us, so I'll use not just the school I'm at, but there are a number of principals who have already taken the step to eliminate the publishing of positions and report cards. So it's not even a first, second, or third year of that. Where I am, we've never given that, and it has not impacted the students negatively at all. So you have to be careful about how we maintain traditions for the sake of maintaining traditions. Is it exciting to hear that you've gotten the highest score in of course it is. But then you look back now and you see what, so the one or the two or the 10 who got the recognition, deservedly so. What's the impact for the hundreds of the others who did not? And you want to do what's best for the greater good. At the end of the day, you want to encourage students to compete with themselves. What is the highest possible score I can gain on this, regardless of how Tom, Dick, or Harry did? And that's the kind of competition you want to see them striving towards, not to the other person, with yourself. So I think if that's the outcome and that's a change in attitudes, we'll grow from here, then we're going in the right direction on that point.
And I'm certainly in agreement with the first, second, third, last mentality, because we all should be taught to get there. And philosophically, if that's the approach, certainly in agreement. But let me just bring in Dr. Bridgeman on this. Dr. Bridgeman, your thoughts on the scores being published and the negative impact it may have on the students in general. And that is where I think should be our focus, not necessarily the public's consumption of these scores.
Well, thank you and good evening, and thanks again for the opportunity to be on this program to discuss this great topic. And I want to also welcome the Minister, the Principal, and the Permanent Secretary. I'm very happy to hear that from the Minister with regards to the Education Act. I really didn't know that the privacy of student information was part of it, and to understand and know now that it's been implemented, I really appreciate that, because here in the United States, we have a law similar called FERPA, that we cannot distribute student scores to the public. And for me, growing up in Grenada and going through the educational system, it used to be just for a boast and a brag, that in terms of how much you come and what was your test scores and stuff like that, and the ranking. So I'm in favor of what I'm hearing with regards to removal of ranking in the school system. And I think to do that, though, we need to have an effective plan in place. I think change takes time. Change is not an event, it's a journey. So we have to have the right things in place to do that. I agree that we need to, and I support the Ministry of Education and the government in deranking and detracking, and also in terms of removal of those test scores. But at the same time, we have to be prepared for the unintended consequences with regards to getting students into the secondary level. So, but I'm in favor of what I'm hearing. Teaching to the test, I think once you have an assessment that matters, that is used for something, teachers will teach to the test. And for me, as an educator, as a professor, I'm not interested in what grade someone got, okay? I'm interested in whether or not that person learns. So getting a good test score doesn't mean that you learn. It means that maybe that you're a good test taker. So we have to remove ourselves from this in terms of what score you got. Let's find other ways of assessing student learning. And this is what I think we're doing here in New York now, where the Board of Regents are looking beyond just test scores, but project-based learning and other stuff, individual oral presentation, looking at attributes, what students can bring to the table rather than just a test score. So we have to move beyond test scores. We're in the 21st century right now, and we really have to look deeper than just a test score.
Let me bring you in here, PS, moving beyond the test score. And Minister mentioned the several components that make up the CPA, and likewise the CSEC examinations, right? So the school-based assessments, etc. How do we ensure the validity of the work submitted by those individuals when it is school-based? And I'm saying this because you'd hear rumors that Miss or Mommy did the project. And hence, there are some cases where a significant proportion of the students come into the CPA with full marks. And whether or not they can write their name properly on the final exam, they're basically inside because of what they came forward with. How do we safeguard against this? Because I think Dr. Bridgeman is absolutely right. What we should be focused on is on learning. But did the student learn if someone else did the work?
Thank you very much, and good night to everyone viewing and listening. Before I respond to this question, I just want to put in context. Now, what we need to do with all of the discussion we're having is to place in context why we assess. And I think that's where we need to start, at what level, why we assess. And if we place that in context, all of the arguments will be really null and void. Now, you talk about persons, and we've heard that, allegations of parents and guardians doing work for students, not just at the CPA, but also at other levels, right? There are some level of internal mechanism to control that, because remember, as Minister said, it's not just a one component assessment. You have other means of assessing students' ability. So I think it's to the teacher now to ensure the internal controls are there and to ask questions and to determine, because if you give a student a project, there are ways in which you can determine as to whether or not it's a student's work. Right, and then you can begin to grade from that, because you want to make sure, and part of this is because we were ranking students, so parents feel I have to do everything else for students, because at the end of the day, it's about me, and the tremendous pressure that even the students that have done well, we look at just the students who do this, even the students that have done well, they are placed under tremendous pressure to do that, right? So what I believe needs to happen here is that the purpose, and I say here, we have focused a lot on assessment of learning. We need to look at focusing of assessment for learning and as learning. And if we take the last two, it means that we are going to shift the entire paradigm as it relates to how students learn and what we do. So once we get to these, where we look at, for example, pacing a student, growth and development, and also preparing for proper remediation of students' work. For instance, because we keep using the word assessment, and yes, we could have summative assessment and all of that. But the CPA was meant to measure where the student is at. And we have done a lot of things over the years, because I've been around the education system for a while, where we can talk about the transition that we have done from grade 6 to grade 1 to Form 1. And that was basically preparing and ushering students to the next level. It's not necessarily saying that you're top and all the competencies are there, but what we're going to do is to help to shape a pathway for the students' success. We've had over the years, and it's something that I'll speak to later in the program, as to what are we doing in terms of helping person to transit properly. We have had baselines been done before. Apart from you getting individual scores coming out of the CXC, they give a report on each student, but we've had baseline done also to prepare, because as Dr. Bridgeman said, you can have good test takers, but that doesn't mean to say that the student is really ready to transit going forward. So we have to begin to look at it and see how we can plan for the development of the students going forward.
All right, Minister, preparation for the students to move forward, and what are some of the things put in place. Now, if we're saying that we're not going to publish scores, but we are going to say the top 200 or 300 get their first choice, we are identifying top performers. Is there some level of hypocrisy in that, or should we not just zone everyone? Why say we're not publishing test scores because it's against privacy, but these select 200, they get their first choice and have been published?
Right. So I don't think the Ministry of Education published that, though, because that was part of our commitment to the people. So we didn't publish the Ministry of Education.
But the results doesn't come from CXC to the Ministry of Education?
Yes, but I'm saying the Ministry of Education did not publish.
Would you care to hedge a bet as to who would have published?
No, I wouldn't, but I can tell you the Ministry of Education didn't.
Okay.
But to answer the question, this is in many ways a signal of our intent to address several of the issues in this regard, right? Mm-hmm. I appreciate the need to give students who have any particular kind of ability and might feel that their needs, their educational needs, may be best treated with in a particular school, the opportunity to get educated there. And hence I see the value in allowing a certain number of students who feel they have a certain degree of aptitude to get a school that they feel will support that. And I'm not sure I would support taking that away from them. It's the same reason we choose either to go to the University of the West Indies or to go to Southern University of the Caribbean or somewhere else, based on the program and how well we think that program will meet the needs that we are pursuing. So I would support that. But we did not publish the names of the students. We sent the names of the successful students to the secondary schools, so the secondary schools are aware. And if you're talking about the schools being aware, well, I'm not sure we have, and that's in keeping with the policy. Right now, there is a CPEA policy that affords those scores. Now, if we decide as a cabinet eventually to change that, we probably may.
I'm worried,
but it hasn't changed yet.
I'm honestly worried that the Caribbean Examinations Council sent the CPE results to the Ministry of Education. The Ministry of Education, by way of policy, would send a school's results to the school, the Ministry of Education, by way of policy, would send to the secondary schools the students placed there. And yet, in the public domain is a list of 200 plus or 200 students that was collated based on their scores.
Right.
There's a problem there.
Yes, there is. And let me say, I recognize it's a problem, but I could tell you, ultimately, we hope to impress even upon all of our stakeholders, the principals, the teachers, that they too could help treat with the information in the same way, consistent with our policy thinking and in keeping with the Education Act.
I'm suggesting that only folks from the Ministry of Education had that information, because it ought to have been separated for disbursement to individual schools otherwise.
Correct.
So to say it didn't come from the Ministry of Education.
No, I could assure you.
It was not an official release from the Ministry of Education.
Correct.
But it must have come from the Ministry of Education.
To the public, no.
Okay.
But
Point
it
taken.
must have come from the
Point taken.
originally, yes.
Point taken there. Let's just go on to zoning a little bit.
Right.
All right. And I know this is not a new policy, but just share with us a little bit on your philosophy for implementing the zoning.
Well, the zoning is nothing new. In fact, we have not. The only thing we've changed is the non-release of scores and ranks, and ultimately the placement of all persons. But the zoning, the 200 was in place, giving them their choice, and the zoning was in effect. In fact, the only persons who don't get zoned by and large are persons who got those first 200 scores. Everybody else, by and large, is subject to zoning. And we try to populate schools in the various districts, hopefully to get, while we try to consider as many students who chose a particular school, you try to give them as long as there's space and all of that, but you consider the geographic location from which those students come with a view to ensuring that all schools are relatively populated. But even then, there are still challenges because you're still living in a system where there's a perception of this school, that school, so there's quite a lot of children that may apply for some schools and leave some lacking less.
Maybe
but zoning is the
PS,
policy in effect.
Allow me to bring PS in here, because PS did boast a while ago that's been around education for a long time. This is not his first stint as Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Education, and certainly we became acquainted when he was principal of one of the secondary schools. Share with us a little bit, PS, why hasn't zoning, quote unquote, worked, although it has been around for a long time? So I know it has been there on paper, I know there have been attempts, but I don't believe it has been strictly enforced, for want of a better term. And what was some of the challenges that prevented that?
But the truth is that it has been implemented to some extent, right? We have to appreciate, of course, the geography or the geographical zones of schools as well, and the pooling of students. So, for example, the predominance of students within the St. Andrew area and the St. George's area, right? And as a matter of fact, we can look at, there were two major interventions to address those issues. So we had one, the coming into being of the Grenada Christian Academy, and also the coming into being of the J.W. Fletcher Catholic Secondary School, right? Because you have a concern. There are a number of reasons why you find students at the level of St. George's, for example, again, because of the economic activities. So most people carry their students, come for all their life, maybe from preschool all the way to secondary school in one particular area, right? So you find sometimes that we try to work through, and over a period of time, it goes back as to, again, the perception people have of certain schools, and people feel that, okay, look, I'm not going to this school, so people will load up. And then added to this is that coming out of the 2012 experience, we were able to accommodate all the students exiting primary school comfortably, right? And we have seen then coming to being, as Mrs. Purcell and so on, people with the private institution coming to being. So we have, space within the secondary, institutions to accommodate. So you find people have options and they move forward. But the truth be told, Mr. Dowe, is not what some people believe on the surface, that, okay, this zoning thing is really terrible. Because we have tried as far as possible to really zone, persons. I think one of the major issue here is this. If you go solely as to where a child has been to school, at the primary school. So, for example, all my life I've gone to school in St. George's, and despite I might be living maybe in St. John, and all the activity, parents, everybody in that, sometimes it's hard pressed really to say, okay, look, the child lives in St. John, you place the child in St. John. So some of these little things that you have to work through.
But is that a little thing? Just because we do have urban centers and the majority of the population works in St. George. I mean, a significant proportion of individuals travel from the other parishes to St. George. It's unfortunately it's the nature of the beast in terms of where commerce is conducted. And we have issues where, the children accompany their parents down, whether they're driving or through public transportation. If we are to place students within their parish, the other thing that you'd have to address is probably some social fallout. Who takes care of that child from the ending of school and when the parent returns? And I want some response to this, to juxtapose on the ease of transfer after a placement from and by the Ministry of Education.
Okay, transfer, we have serious constraint regarding transfer because we cannot just transfer persons without paying attention to the student-teacher ratio. That's a major factor, right? So, and it sits now at 35, to one teacher. So we take this into consideration. And that is why the evaluation is done in terms of the movement within this. So a transfer is not activated just like that, but as if there is some sort of movement. We have had situations where schools, because we incorporate the schools really in terms of the transfer, while the ministry will have this signed off, but it is really a request coming from the school to say, okay, look, we can have the flexibility, to take a few more students, because we want to be very careful in terms of how we manage within what we sign on to.
I would want to come back to that, but I think it's an appropriate time for us to take our first break. So viewers, listeners, we'll be right back.
It's the 4th edition of Hubbard's Live Free for 1 year promotion. Cuatro Punto Cero. It's unbelievably amazing. You can win free fuel, free drinks, cash prizes, free property and vehicular insurance, free cable, TV and internet, free electricity, free coke, free water, free cooking gas, free paint supplies, free passes to Sunshine Promotion events for 2023, free groceries, all for 1 whole year. And every winner receives a lunch package. Be sure to fill out the entry forms and enter it into the marked entry boxes at all Hubbard's departments and at participating outlets. Promotion runs from April 1st to September 30th, 2023. Draws will be held every 2 weeks. Terms and conditions apply.
Freedom is driven to pursue that passion that keeps you up at night and makes you smile in your sleep. Freedom is bold to embrace the possibilities that can open up your world and conquer new heights. Freedom is fabulous, with bits and pieces that enhance the quality of your life. Freedom is what you do with the flexibility to change path or direction when you need to. Freedom breeds ambition and purpose while having loads of fun along the way. But most of all, freedom is well-deserved for the road traveled and the journey still to come. Unleash your freedom with Nexa Credit Union. Offer ends August 31st, 2023. Call us on 440-1354 or visit our website to pre-apply. Apply now. Freedom awaits.
In our part of the world, we need to be prepared for natural disasters like storms and hurricanes, even outside of the season. I'm sure you'll agree that keeping our loved ones, homes, and businesses safe is important. So, I came up with a few quick tips to help you stay safe. First, make a family disaster plan and ensure that everyone in your household is familiar and comfortable with it. Remember to add batteries and flashlights to your emergency kit. Don't be caught off guard by natural disasters. Prepare now. For more information, visit grenlec.com.
Good evening and welcome back to Beyond the Headlines. We're talking about the CPA examinations with the Minister, Permanent Secretary, representative of the Principals Association, and a principal himself, Dr. Bridgeman, Grenadian in New York. And Dr. Bridgeman, let me just bring you back in here. We are talking before the break of zoning. Is this something that you see within the New York education system, and how is it managed, if it is?
Well, there are a couple of things in terms of New York. If you're in the city, New York State, there are 5 big city schools, and then you have local district. I work in a local district that really is independently owned and run by the residents within the school district. However, in the city itself, you have zoning, but one can go to other schools if they want to. The issue for me with regards to the zoning issue, I mean, as a product of Grenada education system, coming from St. Andrews and going to GBSS back in the day, I am concerned with regards to which I support, the removal of the ranking system. I think the ranking and the selection of students to secondary school have to go hand in hand. The 200 selected and to get the choices again, I think the question I have to ask, and maybe the minister or the permanent secretary can answer that question for me, how do we create parity in our school system in Grenada that a Happy Hill Secondary would not be deemed as, oh, you're going to Happy Hill Secondary, this is a bad school. Or you're going to St. David's, this is this. On the PBC, the GBSS, the convents are the ones, because of the selection of those students in those schools, are the top priority. How do we provide for everyone to have equity and access and an inclusive aspect with regards to our school systems in Grenada? Because if you're going to not rank, and at the same time you'll have students selecting and going to the schools because of the schools, then you continue with the same process. So how do we change that?
It seems like we have a new host.
I'm sorry.
I'll put you on there. Tony, that's fine. That's fine. And let's just bring in Minister just to respond to that one. But also, I know you have some concerns about the social fallout which goes along with the zoning. So you can respond to both.
So I think it's clear that even our attempt to derank and remove scores is attempting to do exactly that. Is attempting to contribute to that direction, and we're not wanting to probably do all or everything at once, but we are confident that, okay, it's 200 of the almost 2,000 persons. We have lots of intelligent students across the island. Even if you allow those 200 and you zone, the zoning allows for intelligent students all over to be placed, if they came from that particular locale, to be placed in that school. And so the probability of having very intelligent students go to all schools across different geographic locations becomes very high. And so that, in some great measure, attempts to address parity across schools. So I'm comfortable that this is a step in the right direction in response to Dr. Bridgeman's question. There's probably yet some rethinking and reviewing whether we keep that 200 or not, but for now, we're comfortable to feel we've made some steps absolutely in the right direction. A while ago, you asked about the social fallout, and the issue of what's happening with students in schools when we place, and some schools probably being oversubscribed and some undersubscribed, and the zoning and the social fallouts from it, we've had a bit of discussion about that, and we're aware that this is part of a wider macroeconomic something that has to be addressed. So while we attempt to put increasing economic activity in some of the rural areas to avoid everybody from having to come to town with their children, hopefully more persons could find attractive economic activities in some of the rural communities, but it might mean a careful look to address whether it's the daycare facilities that might be more readily available, the transportation, or some of those other feeder services that allow parents to more readily opt to go to town with their children if they could be found in some of the more localized geographic areas.
Or community centers probably opened up and utilized.
So that's part of the discussion that we've been having, because we are aware it's a bigger problem, but we are just sure that these couple steps are already heading in the right direction.
Mrs. Purcell, we're talking parity. As representative of the Principals Association, we can talk parity of students and students' placement, but I think the concern of the parents is the parity of the competencies as well within those various schools. Has there been any conversations at all to address equity of the human resources across the schools that would give the parents comfort in placing their children in any school?
You asked the question, but I probably have to look to my right or my left to answer the first part of that question. So I'll probably pull a Dr. Bridgeman and ask the question of Has there been conversations, Minister, in this regard? But before you answer, or rather, when you get back to answering, I think it's a valid concern. And again, I'm pausing for a minute as a principal and speaking as a parent. When you sit in October to select choices, you have 5 choices, I believe, of where the child would like to go to school for secondary school. And some parents will call, can we put the same school 5 times? No, you can't. You can't. So you have to rank 5 schools. And then the conversation with the children about how they're coming up with what is the best 5. Yes, we spoke about geographical location and zoning, and that has an element to it. But you are very right in assuming, in identifying that very often as a parent, first of all, you're wondering which school is going to offer your child quality education by way of quality teaching and learning experiences. And that's a real concern for any parent sending his or her child to school. Because I'm also in the private sector, there's an even greater concern why you would see a proliferation of private schools over time, because the focus is in trying to ensure there's consistency in the delivery of quality education. From a minister's perspective, the questions that can be asked now would be, what have we done to ensure that our teachers are trained and retrained adequately? I'm big on the training part. Because you go to some schools and you'd find a larger percentage of the teachers who are there are a lot less experienced and a lot less trained. That often translates to the quality of the service they're offering. That often translates to the public level of competence. That often translates to many other things that affects, at the end of the day, the quality of teaching and learning experiences in the classroom. So when parents select particular schools, the perception is that these schools do a better job at it. If we dig that deeper, that's not always the case, by the way. If we dig it deeper, that's actually not always the case. But there's a perception that's out there, and often perception seems to be reality. So that's what parents are going after. I remember after the CPA results came out this year, I'm segueing for a moment, because there was all the talk about the lack of ranking this year, interestingly enough, because I pay attention to the little things like that, the conversation started to have a little different tone on social media. So now we were having persons discussing how many schools got top performers, or how many students are going in this direction, or the quality of the zoning here, and you had conversations that probably generally happen, but it happened a lot more this time because there was a lot less to talk about in terms of ranking, which is good, because now we're trying to look deeper and see what the data is saying to us. So that I thought that was good for us to change the conversation a little bit. But what came out of some of those conversations, even in an unofficial sense now, is if you take the majority of your top performers, and I don't say like that because they rank top performers, those with higher test scores, and you place them in particular schools, and then there's a pattern over the years of that happening over and over again, then we are reinforcing the perception every single year that some schools are better than others. And even if the other schools have gone significant inroads to improve their product.
And let me bring in PS in terms of responding to that. Of course, you can also chat to the fact that the CSEC results are likewise published. So if my child's next step is CSEC by way of a big examination, and we see strong performances coming from school A and B versus school C, then I will be selecting school A or B and relegating school C.
Let me first of all say to you, Mr. Dowe, that we will be treating with the CSEC the same way as we have done for the CPA. So the public could expect to not to see a publishing of results in the same way that it was done before, all right? So
I don't think they'll survive that, Pierre.
No, it's just, so let them get the appetite that, look, this is how you're going to be done, right? So we have to be consistent. No, the thing is, Mr. Dowe, we need to look at this. You see, sometimes we take, and of course the Ministry of Education may take some blame for it. We take snippet of information and make some generalization, right? We sometimes don't look at all the variables that are encompassing a student, achievement at the end of the day. And we may just look at school. And we've been having that conversation at the ministry, at our management level. And we've been saying, sometimes we fail to really place in context the value-added aspect of education from some schools. And some schools sometimes don't even amplify that. As using the example that Mrs. Purcell used. For example, if we go, and I mean, again, that is just arbitrary, because I tell you what, 5 years could make, there are a lot of things that happen in 5 years to determine results at the end of the day. So it's not just about you entering. You entering as a top performer at the CPA doesn't mean much at the end of the day what happens after 5 years.
Let me ask you, because we're talking now of research. Is there any work done or correlational analysis that can point to CPA performance with CSEC results, whether there is a strong correlation or there's none?
I don't know of any done in that comprehensive way. I know people done snippet, just maybe as a study, but not really to make that kind of generalization. But we arbitrarily might say, well, no, there may not be any significant here, or maybe anything significant where that is concerned.
I know Dr. Bridgeman wanted to comment, so let me just give him an opportunity to contribute.
Yeah, there are a couple of things that were said, and I want to go back to Mrs. Purcell, and the question that you just asked is something that I've been asking for a long time. Is there any longitudinal study done from anyone that is the top coming into secondary schools and where they are today, or those who have got 16-1, 18-1s versus where the others where they are today? We need to kind of do some studies on that to see what results are we talking about, because too many times we focus education about those exit exams. And I don't think, in terms of the paradigm shift where we move into, that should not be the goal of education right now. I want to go back to something Mrs. Purcell asked, and I really believe in that. With the change that you're making, one of the key aspects is the professional learning of your teachers. If your teachers are not on board, or if your teachers are not professionally developed, bringing in de-ranking and all those kind of stuff, it's going to fall on its face. We need to prepare our teachers, our leaders in the school for that. Big change, differentiation of instruction, they need to learn, be professional, learn about that. Inclusion, which is a #1 piece now, because I know in Grenada you have a special ed school that is self-contained. I'm one that a strong believer in the least restrictive environment. The special ed students going together with the gen ed students. But we have to train teachers. We can't just make a change, a policy change, and then we go into the same system, because it's going to fail. So professional learning and coaching, the number one piece in professional learning is coaching. When teachers are coached by other teachers, they do well. So we must have a plan in place for this to work, because we're going to come back again and it's said, oh, it didn't work. People are going to say, you tried before, it didn't work. Why are we doing it again? You have to do a needs assessment. You have to collaborate and consult with people to make things work. In education, I always say, the church and the school system are the two institutions that resist change, and it will take a long time to change. But we have to professionally develop our staff. And I know it has been happening in the past, but we have to continue to do that. And who are the teachers teaching those students? What are they training? Okay, we can't just take teachers off from just the raw materials from passing some subjects back in the day and saying, okay, you're a teacher and you were not student taught anywhere or learn something, just teaching the content. Guys, we're in the 21st century. We really have to make some effective changes to make this work in our school system. So I really believe, Mrs. Purcell, thank you so much for stressing this point and the professional learning of our teachers. We have to get them prepared, Mr. Minister, for this, because this is good work. This is adaptive work. These are our students we're talking about, and our students are coming with learning needs, and the one glove fit everything won't work. We got to assess them and know where they are and start by teaching them the skills necessary and not giving up on them. Build safe schools. It's needed.
All right. Minister,
sorry about that.
No, there's no need to apologize for that, because what you did was preempt a question of pre-service training. Right. We have not embraced that philosophy here in Grenada. So someone leaves TAMCC, for example, and because they were able to secure K passes in a particular subject, they're now teacher. And they're not only teacher, they're probably teacher to our most vulnerable, the Form 1s, the Form 2s. Yes. Are we going to move under your stewardship to a pre-service training professional teachers system?
Certainly, if given the time to have it done. Now, we'd have to appreciate...
let's talk the timeline. So we're talking a second term, or we need 4 years, 5 years?
No, I don't have all of the keys in my hand. Today I might be here, tomorrow you might find me somewhere else, as the chair of cabinet might choose. So I just bear that in mind. But I'm saying the issue of pre-service is not new. In fact, we have had persons as far as recently as within the last couple of years doing pre-service.
But there is a constant fight to get access to the teacher education program in TAMCC by members of non-public teachers. So teachers in private schools, and they have a significant portion of children that they're teaching, but there is a blockage to accessing teacher education. And there's even more challenges for those who are not in system. Right. To get access to teacher education. And I don't know if we adequately promote the social sciences with education major that is available at TAMCC. And those are three separate ways of getting the training, but there seems to be walls going up against accessing it.
Well, I'm not sure I can speak to all of the walls. I know we support the teacher training. It's ongoing. There's early childhood, there is primary, there's secondary. I know we even contemplating the DPED for persons who have gone on and done their first degrees in particular content areas, that the education part will result in a UWI certified diploma in education. So we have always been in favor of training. We know that there is always need for retooling and upgrading, so we quite support the suggestion by Dr. Bridgeman. And in terms of the professionalizing of the teaching service, it's something that's within our policy thinking, and pre-service training, that is there too. But we have to recognize, given the capacity of the TAMCC and the Teachers College and the number of persons who are currently in the system untrained, it's always going to take a bit of catching up. to try to get those persons trained while we have a small cohort of persons that we allow.
Are we saying, therefore, that within the next academic year, we can not only see a policy position, but a strategy that would lead to increased training for our teachers as we move towards pre-service?
Well, I certainly think so. In fact, we came in and we met teachers going through a 3-year period, and we wanted to, in consultation with the unions, we had it brought back to 2 years with a specific view to optimizing and speeding up the training to ensure that persons could go through increased numbers of persons. And in fact, it's our view that all persons in the system who are currently teaching, we want them to be trained, and we do encourage persons to get pre-trained.
P.S. Morain, this one is probably a controversial one, so I'm going to throw it your way. There has been an argument that a teacher after coming out of Teachers College is probably worse off in terms of their classroom management than when they left, because they were out of the classroom for as long as they were. I don't know the validity of the statement, but I've heard it from some quarters, and I've heard it more than once. In the absence from the classroom, you actually lose skills because you lose the practice while you're doing the theory.
Well, this could be yes and no. And I say this from the point of view is based on how the program is packaged. In that you have micro-teaching lesson sessions, you have different things being done. You know, it is different to when I was teacher trained, where you had, you went for a long period, and the other one short, you had maybe 2 or 3 weeks session. Now I think you have a longer, about 10 weeks practicum and so on. I think is, again, my thing is we need to relook teacher ed program. And I'll tell you this, what I've heard is that people will argue to say that, listen, somebody can graduate to the teacher ed program with a perfect GPA and they can't teach. Right? And it says to us that we need to pitch the program at competency base. So is not heavily content. Yes, there's content, but not heavy. But is that pushing, you know, the methodology and so on. So when somebody comes out there, they can teach. No. If you look at it, for example, all the other profession that you train for, you want somebody who's when that person comes, they must be competent. So I think the focus must be on competence. And I want to say this: we have looked at our teachers and how we can go forward. We have looked at different ways, because we sometimes believe that putting you through that 2-year program or 3-year program is what it takes, but we need to look at strategic and purposeful training for our teachers. And we've started the conversation as part of a wider strategy that we're going to roll out. You know, I guess Minister kind of tentative in saying it, because we're not capping it, we didn't cap it where we want it, but we believe that for us to do well, we need to upscale our teachers. And no question about that. We need to have them into and not just upscale, but also look at even our appraisal, performance appraisal, and not just look at it as, because in many cases some teachers see it as a punitive measure, unlike one for improvement. Right? We talked earlier of assessment, and many times when we look at assessment, the lessons learned of the system, we only point it at the student. But it's a twofold. When you do an assessment and you assess students, you will point whether it is a teaching deficiency or learning deficiencies. And we have to begin to strike the balance. So all of these things we have to put in context to really build. And I agree with both Mrs. Purcell as well as Dr. Bridgeman relative to we really need to focus and purposeful teacher training, professional training, building professional learning communities so that we can really be at a place where we feel that, you know, we are on a path to really move forward. So there is some work to be done there, and we are committed to doing that. So we've started the conversation, and I am certain that we'll be ready to roll out different packages as to how we're going to do this over, the next, cycle in terms of where we look at maybe 2 to the 4 year cycle, we should be able to be in a better place.
Okay. I'd want to address the differentiated classroom because that is going to be key, but this will come after our next break. So viewers, we'll be right back.
Have you heard about the new Softweave bathroom tissue with total hygiene? As hygiene and safety have taken center stage, our bathroom tissue is now manufactured with 3 different technologies to offer the best protection for you and your family. UVC light technology for a safe and effective disinfection process, eliminating 99.9% of microorganisms. Also, production at high temperatures, killing all types of germs and bacteria. And it's pH controlled with delicate fibers to prevent irritation for even sensitive skin. Softweave Total Hygiene Bathroom Tissue, available in supermarkets and shops island-wide. Visit Softweave Caribbean Facebook or Instagram pages for more information.
In our part of the world, we need to be prepared for natural disasters like storms and hurricanes, even outside of the season. I'm sure you'll agree that keeping our loved ones' homes and businesses safe is important. So, I came up with a few quick tips to help you stay safe. First, make a family disaster plan and ensure that everyone in your household is familiar and comfortable with it. Remember to add batteries and flashlights to your emergency kit. Don't be caught off guard by natural disasters. Prepare now. For more information, visit grenlec.com.
Do you have muscular pain that no one can find a solution for? Are you tired of taking meds for joint and other pains? Hills and Valley Medicare Center on Grenville Street, St. George is here to help you heal. We will help you map a path to your full recovery. Visit us Monday to Saturday for a consultation with our on-site doctor, physiotherapist, and massage team. You will be glad you did. Our Medicare Center, a proud member of the Hills and Valley group of companies. On the hilltop or in the valley, we are with you wherever life takes you. Hills and Valley Pharmacy. Your health is our business.
Good evening and welcome back. We're talking CPA, we're talking promotion of our students into the secondary school system. And as we left off, we were talking about the differentiated classroom. And Mrs. Antoine Purcell, let me just bring you in here. How can we cater for this varied population that will be result from zoning, because if we want to get equity and parity within student placement, it also means that we'd have different types of students within the same classroom. How can this adequately be addressed in the system today, and what are some of the changes that we need to make to accomplish this successfully?
Very loaded question, but a pertinent one. I'll attempt to answer it. It can be looked at in a variety of ways. Let's look at the upsides of it. Because we're doing what we're doing now from a policy direction for the Ministry of Education, we're going to have greater diversity in our schools. That's actually a good thing. You're going to have a greater diversity of learners in the classroom. And for the competent teacher, that's a great thing because it actually changes the quality of the learning experience. It can actually be a very enriching process. It can promote tolerance for differences in a way that you can't if they were all presenting similarly. So it can be looked at that way. But now that we have greater diversity in the classroom, how are we going to address that? Now that we have more students in the classroom who are presenting with varied learning styles, they were all presenting like that now, but they present with varied learning styles and to a greater degree now. So now that we have students who would require a deeper variation in how we're assessing, now that, and you can see the pattern here, now that we have so many of the differences that will happen, how are we prepared to cater for our students' needs? That's a big question. Differentiated instruction, differentiated learning, all of that is great to say in theory. The question now remains, are we adequately prepared in our schools to address that? I'm going to use an example that we use at our school. Do we have the autonomy in our schools to vary the instructional methods that we're using within the very same classroom to account for the variety and diversity with the students in that classroom? And if the answer to that question is yes, do we then have the teachers trained to be able to do so? Do we then have adequate teachers in terms of numbers to be able to do so? Do we then have adequate support systems? And it's a biggie for me, so in time to come, that's probably where I'm going to focus, not probably, it's likely where I'm going to focus a lot more of my energies as a principal in terms of the support systems we put in place for students. It's all well and good to have competent teachers leading from the front, or co-teachers, or working together, collaborating. There's going to be a need for support system outside that lesson. Whether it is psychosocial, whether it is remedial, whether it is enhancement, because not just the bottom end, it's also the top end, with whatever those support systems need to be. So that at the end of the day, we get back to ensuring that we're doing the best for each child. And for the teacher ratios in the secondary school is 1 to 35. For each of the 35 students in front of that teacher, how are we going to differentiate the learning sufficiently to get success for each one? That's a big question, and that's a question that has to start off with the policymakers before we implement.
Minister, it's obviously over to you. Whoa, but do we have it? How do we do it? 1 to 35 is the ratio that we speak to, one teacher to 35 students. But with this publication or non-publication of the CPA scores, there was also the announcement that all students sitting the CPA examinations would be promoted to secondary school. Will this put a burden on that 1 to 35? Will our schools capable of accommodating both in terms of the physical infrastructure as well as the number of teachers for what may be an increased number of students going into the secondary schools? And then coming back to Samantha's point, is that if one who may not have been placed last year is now placed, and they were not placed because of a combination of things, lack of space was one of the issues, may have been competence based on their scores, but they are now being placed. Are our teachers and schools able to respond to this wide variety of students who would now be under their care?
Right. So, you packed quite a lot of things in there.
I can listen.
Let me unpack them.
Right.
As far as I can remember. I don't think we have a challenge for space in the school system at the secondary level. I think a lot of the space issues relate to the same perception that we thought. So some schools end up becoming oversubscribed compared to others. In fact, we have some schools, while some proliferate, others numerically are dying and struggling. And that's part of the dynamic that we have to treat with from a policy point of view, from a ministry point of view. So I think if we begin to regulate our numbers a bit more equitably, we'll see we won't have a challenge with it. And we are still guided by the 1 to 35. So that part. Our teachers, I think the bulk of our teachers are trained, I think. Yeah. Qualified, yeah. And I think in the teacher training program, as far as I remember, even from as far back as my days, there was some degree of, I'd say probably introduction focus on differentiated instruction, there is always need for more. And I remember even when I served as the Grenada's UNICEF focal point for the child-friendly schools framework here in Grenada, we did a lot of sessions with a number of primary schools, a number of secondary schools that we wanted to introduce that child-friendly schools framework to. And among the things that we trained in was differentiated instruction. Truly, the expectation is, even before we go to the placement of all the students, in every regular classroom, even if we place students who only get a certain score and we leave those behind, in a normal classroom, there is still the need, if you're going to be an effective instructor, if you're going to be an effective teacher, to do differentiated instruction, because people have different learning styles. And not everybody's going to be at the same level. People have different reading abilities, even in the same normal class. And so what we're asking is not extremely a stretch. I mean, I understand it probably will require a bit more attention, because admittedly you have people who are coming in who may have less abilities, less competencies in some areas.
I don't know the answer to this, so let me ask you. What do we consider a quote-unquote pass in CPA? And I'm talking about placement now. What we believe is a satisfactory percentage a student should earn on the Caribbean Primary Exit Assessment exam?
Well, I think as the current policy, well, not the current policy because we're placing everybody, but as it was, you had to score 50% in both, at least 50% in both local and external components. Mr. Morain, I think that's what it is.
Average 50% average.
So 50% allowed one to be placed.
Yeah.
And that has been the policy.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not, my recollection seems as though it varied a little bit, because I believe a few years ago there was a bottom line saying nobody with 30% should be going over into secondary schools.
So I would say, Mr. Dowe, I think it is it's flexible. Now, we have to understand that the Education Act gives the minister the power to determine whatever threshold if everybody not going, right? So in that case, as you said, I know there was a period when they talk about 40% and so on, right, going forward. But I want to say something here. This threshold is based on availability of space. It was always a space issue.
Yes.
And we seem to be missing that. I remember...
But yes, let me just interrupt you here. When we started this conversation, we were talking about being student-centric. We were talking about competencies of the individual students. Juxtapose that in terms of being a space issue, because I have two problems. I have a problem if one is competent but there isn't space, and I have a problem if someone is not competent but there is space and we put them up. So in other words, what is being taught within the walls should be secondary education, or are we just putting additional pressures of on teachers within the secondary school system and causing that wide variety in terms of the students in front of them? Because we have individuals who may not have reached the mark, the threshold of 50%, but they are being placed within the secondary system.
And let me just unpack this. Now, what I'm saying here, Mr. Dowe, is this. The 50% came about at some point when there were insufficient space in secondary school. In 2012, everybody went to secondary school. And that is when Grenada declared as having access to universal secondary education. Right? So what we see here now is not new. As a matter of fact, I think in many cases, Grenada were able to benefit from grant resources for the mere fact that they were part of the join some of the other islands being persons who subscribe to universal secondary education. Now, you're transiting from primary to secondary, right? So here is it, as I said earlier, and that's why I put very clear and square on the table the purpose to which we use assessment. Because really and truly, let us face it, what would somebody just attaining primary school education be able to accomplish out there, right? So it's not your measure in terms of having person inducted in the society. you're looking at another level. The thing is that you allow persons to, or students, that opportunity to enter into secondary school, right? And as we talked earlier about teaching the child, right, to go forward, we mentioned earlier about differentiated instruction. As far as I know, it's a prominent, it's a staple in education, differentiated instruction. Because as we establish, the children, they will be different. So we have to cater for the differences. And I want to make a point as well. We're tonight talking about the secondary, but we have to begin to fix that in the primary, being able to do differentiated instruction well in the primary school so we wouldn't inherit that problem going forward. And that is something that the ministry, we hope to do, to work with our teachers to begin to fix that issue where it exists instead of trying to plaster higher up. So yes, for now we have to address it at the secondary level because with us. But we are saying here we have to go right down.
So the strategy address an early childhood intervention.
Exactly.
Which is the most important part of
so we fix it at that level, and then we can then breathe easier as we go forward.
I want to bring in Dr. Bridgeman here, but I also need to bring in the viewers, and we have limited times. 440-1252, that's the number if you would like to share. Dr. Bridgeman, your thoughts?
Yes, a lot of things was said. I just want to go back right quick. And the question that you asked about a teacher may be removed from the classroom for some professional learning and loses classroom management. That a teacher doesn't lose classroom management. Classroom management is about relationships. Once you have that relationship with students, you're good. It's not about rules. Yes, rules are part of the system, but effective classroom management is about the relationship that you have with students. And I always tell my teachers, students come back and visit not because you knew the content, or you were good in math and stuff, but because of the way you treat them. And that's the number.
We do have our first caller online, so let's just welcome caller. Good evening. Good evening, caller. Go ahead.
Good evening. I'm happy to see your panelists. Quite some esteemed educators there. Dr. Bridgeman and Minister of Education and so on. Mr. Morain, a great team there, and Mrs. Purcell. What I want to say though, the CPEA exam is both a norm reference and criterion reference exam. That means that in terms of the norm reference side of it, it stacks up against all the students who write the exam. But it's also criterion reference in the sense that it looks at various skills areas, various areas that students must master, okay? And I think what we need to do is, when the results come back, we need to focus a lot on the criterion reference part of the exam, where we can use the results to help students to improve. Okay, that's what I basically would like to see. But it is a norm. It is a norm reference exam too. Okay, it looks at both aspects of the exam criteria. Okay, so I just wanted to mention that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that that contribution, and certainly is important for us to be aware of that student-to-student comparison along with the competencies. Dr. Bridgeman, you can go ahead until the next caller comes through.
Yeah, the point about differentiation, this has been talked about a lot, and I'm hearing that from way back when that has been taught. But when you ask the question about how do we do it, I think that's what matters. Differentiation, yes, it's about individual learning needs, and the biggest piece is designing your lesson based upon the individual needs. So you have to understand the person's need first before you design the lesson. This is what we talk about, understanding by design, backward design. Begin with the end in mind. There are a number of strategies that we can use in our classroom that regarding differentiated learning. You can design your lesson based upon student needs, is number one. Group students by shared interests, by topics, okay, by academic ability. You can do that for assignments in differentiation of instruction. Assess student learning through formative assessment. Don't wait until the summative. So the size of the class doesn't, at times may impede that differentiation, but the strategies teachers can use, it doesn't matter how many students in that class, you can do that. Again, the management of the classroom, creating a safe, welcoming classroom helps a lot with differentiation, because when students are coming in and you're going to say, oh, this person got this and this person got that, oh, you're dumb, and this and those kind of words being used, it kind of does not create a safe learning environment. It can be done. It's not just talking about the topic about we need to differentiate. That's the most overused word in education. Differentiate. But we do not show people, we do not demonstrate how to do it.
And thank you very much. We do have another caller online. Good evening, Colin. Welcome.
Good night. Hello, good night.
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, there are some very brilliant gentlemen and lady, perhaps. I think I come correct in hearing the voice on the program. But education is a subject that everybody can speak about, and few, if anybody, knows about. The fact remains in education, from the time we begin to group students, we are aiming at one thing: homogeneity. Seeing if they can be alike as much as possible within a particular subject area and within various subject areas. So we have class, we have grades, we have this. This is an impossibility. Another thing we have to bear in mind is this. Teachers in teaching might be selected for further training. Attending a teacher's college for training is no guarantee that it will result generally in better teaching practices. I trained at a teacher's college for 14 years. Some teachers go to college just to pass and become qualified, so that some of them could be even lazier in the classroom, with greater degrees of comfort because I'm a qualified teacher. The fact remains that the public's perception and rating of school is no accident. There might be some errors here and there, but it is no accident. A number of variables are taken into account. In any school, you have the good teacher, the indifferent teacher, the not so good teacher. And in any class, you cannot get complete homogeneity in any subject area. There are differences, heterogeneity within the class.
Yes, thank you for that, caller, and we certainly appreciate the point being made and some of the challenges. And I particularly like, well, as a teacher of teachers, recognizing the differentiations even within his classroom. We are coming almost to the end of time, so we'd want to certainly have some parting shots. And probably, Dr. Bridgeman, I'll just continue with you. Just some bits of advice as to how this transition can be appropriately made, and you started down that trend as you were going, as we move towards a universal secondary education system, or continuing a universal secondary education system, and some of the safeguards to ensure that we don't lose students, and I would emphasize particularly our boys.
Man, That's well said, and I really want to thank GBN again and the panelists for being here. This is a really important topic, as you mentioned, the boys. We lose a lot of our boys in schools, and especially black boys. And this is something that we have to do a better job in education of reaching our black boys. Again, as I said at the beginning, I do support the Ministry of Education and the government of Grenada with regards to the decision in terms of universal access. However, it has to be done in phases. People have to be prepared for it. You need to have parental involvement. Again, you need to also have teacher training, professional learning, as we said before. We need to have a commitment to inclusion. We cannot just talk about it and not have that commitment to inclusion, a value of equity, as we mentioned, and access. Because if you just have them coming into the school system and you don't provide a support for them, what you're going to have is a lot of those students will drop out. So we're going to have a dropout problem in Grenada. Phasing the piece, and I think always in terms of training, monitoring that implementation, and to the minister, be prepared for, and minister and the permanent secretary, be prepared for the implementation dip. In any change you put forward, you're going to have an implementation dip. Don't give up on it. Monitor it. Look at it, to assess it, speak to people, collaborate. Again, it's very important that you hear from people and you collaborate so that you can make it work. But I think for the sake of our students in Grenada, we need to have a sense of parity. And the big question I like to end with for Grenada, we have to look at what does the profile of a high school student in Grenada look like? After they went through secondary school, what is the profile of a Grenadian high school graduate? Thank you.
Thank you so very much for those closing comments. P.S., I'll move over to you for your own closing comments. And as you zone, being in charge of the administrative arm, does the interest of students bear any influence, and not just the naming of schools, but someone may have, for example, interest in the technical and vocational areas, and they might be particularly schools that are better than others, just in terms of equipment as well as trained teachers. Is this something one can lobby for by way of a transfer for the right fit for that student?
We have seen that. We have seen, parents put forward different arguments, for transfer. And among those would be this, right? I also want to conclude by saying this, because the point we started off and we talked differentiated and all that, and even some of the conversation before, it sounded as though it was doom and gloom. I want to just share something with the public. Now, if we had, let's suppose the policy position was not to go with all the students, place all of them, the number of students that were going to be retained this year would have been 78, right? I want to add another piece to this. Out of that 78, 63 students score between 40 and 49. Right? So I want to say to people that it's not all doom and gloom if we were going to play with the numbers. Right? And I want to add to this is that at the ministry we've started looking at some interventions that we're going to pursue. Our first order is to do some work with some of the students, and we're not even pitching at 50, so we're looking at above that. So we're going to look at within the range from all those, and we go up to 59 or 60 or thereabout. So we are going to establish some centers throughout, and we're going to give greater details afterwards throughout. We're going to give some scaffolding, some support. We are going to rely, of course, support for teachers as well as retired teachers to be part of that construct. Interested in that as well, we have decided to package in this some social, some psychosocial care as well, as we go forward. And then we are going to return with our baseline, at the beginning of September, and we continue to reinforce and help our teachers. But we're going to do a greater detailing of that, as we go forward. So I want to just thank the viewing public for having us. Look forward for exciting things coming out of education. we are exciting. We are not reporting everything yet, but we are doing heavy planning. We have to come back into detail. Our pathway to enhancing skills development is something that we're pushing. Is one of our signature.
We look forward to welcoming
event. So we are excited at the Ministry of Education, and we believe we are well placed, under the stewardship of, Senator the Honorable, a man who is a homegrown man where education is concerned. So we are working, perfect team, trying to get things together. So thank you very much for having us.
Mrs. Antoine Purcell, as you share your closing comments, you actually are the recipients of those promoted into secondary schools. So some of the things that you look forward to, some of the things that you need to do some work in order to adequately serve those students coming onto the secondary school system in September.
All right, let's start with A. 50% is not a pass mark at the secondary school, so I'm not quite sure why we're using that. So we have to start from there. 75% has to be a baseline. Forgive me, that's how I feel about it. Let's go with B. The data from the research has to be a lot more effectively used. And I say that because I have seen, I have seen baseline exams sit in schools that I've been leading for months on end. And then my question becomes, when the data is then processed, who is the recipient of that result to then take effective action? You're right when you said when assessment is done, it's both for the student and for the teacher. In this case, it's also for the school to be able to. So what I did this year is, when the students are coming with their scores, we're analyzing as they come so that we know before we even start in September what to expect from the group that's going to be with us, from that cohort. What areas we'll have to put to support them to ensure that they are hitting the mark from the get-go. I want to say I'm excited about the possibilities for universal secondary education, but I also want to caution, as the average principal is feeling right now, great that we're planning, we want to see the action. Because it's great to sit here in June and say that in September is the reality of every single secondary school principal to deal with it then. Because at that point, whether you've put it in place or not, they'll be forced, and not everything is lined up properly. So I'm just speaking on behalf of all secondary school principals when I say I'm happy to hear this thought being put into it and there's planning, but genuinely, because principals at the end of the day, we just want to do what's best for our students. So we want to know that we are adequately prepared to do just that. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And Minister, floor is yours.
Thank you. But let me start by thanking you and thanking our listeners for listening and being a part of this conversation, and my esteemed colleagues for facilitating this as well. I want to assure the public that we are going to give due attention to preparing our students the best way possible. Consulting, using the exam scores. In fact, we've already commissioned the curriculum department to work along with exams to begin to get the profiles where the weaknesses were and the areas of lack, so that there could be due focus. Consultation with the teachers from which schools the students came, to ensure that they get both the exam results as given by CXC and the teacher assessment, so that a proper program can be put together to be delivered within the summer. So that's already en route, and we are also looking at how we can regroup our officers. We have literacy coordinators in the system, not all of them deployed where they probably were supposed to have been, but we're going to regroup and look at, in conjunction with probably retired teachers or whatever system, to give continued support. One of the things I want to mention, though, there are probably two. If we did not say universal education, the nation may not have been having the conversation about the 78% that would have been left back in primary schools. Yeah, the 78 persons who may have been left back, if we didn't say universal, everybody goes forward, we wouldn't have been having a conversation about them. I just want to posit that out there. We'll be having the conversation about them because they're being put forward. Otherwise, it's quite easy to leave them behind. They just didn't make it. We want every child to succeed, and we committed to giving the support the best way we know how, with the best resources that we can do. We are also aware that while we give that support at the upper level, the real challenges need to be fixed down in early childhood. I keep saying that, and we are already engaging that vociferously at the Ministry of Education to ensure that in the next 4-5 years, we eliminate the number of students that come up with those deficiencies and lacks higher up in the system. I thank you very much for having us tonight, and thank you all our listeners and viewers.
Thank you very much, Minister Stantoine Purcell, P.S. Morain, and Dr. Bridgeman, and to you, our viewers who joined us and rallied with us over the last 94 minutes or thereabouts on this evening's Beyond the Headlines. And I certainly look forward to joining you again next week, 6 days, 22 and a half hours, when we'll have another episode discussing the issues affecting you. Good evening, Godspeed. Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.